Krista, so many questions potentially. One, I don't think you mentioned, unless I dozed off for a second. In the UK, the use of telematics, the black box, particularly for young drivers that have a very high crash rate, has become very prevalent. About 50% of them now have some sort of phone app or black box which they're required to use for their insurance purposes. And they get a lower insurance cost as a result. The insurers claim this is having significant effects on reducing collisions. And obviously one of the things they monitor most closely is speed and aggressive driving. And it seems to me sometimes we measure speeds, average speeds, top speeds, so forth, but there are subtle differences in the driving behaviour and the acceleration and so forth that can be perhaps as much a factor as the absolute speed. So I just wonder whether that's an area where you think is promising or and could be extended or not.
It is promising, but since many years it has been promising because trucks and buses and so on have it in Sweden as far as I know. And it seems as if nothing special happens.
But so, I've heard that trucks and buses, that companies are introducing them more for fuel saving benefits really, and they're getting substantial fuel saving benefits, and then they get a co-benefit, a safety co-benefit.
That was what we learned 20, 30 years ago. I think that campaigns of saving fuel was so efficient also from a safety point of view. No, I think when you raise a question, I think I have mainly missed that point. I haven't been studying it regularly for Europe.
Well, maybe the UK has a lot of these systems now, and other countries perhaps less so. But although I think on trucks and buses and other fleet vehicles that may not be the case. They may be.
It's definitely important enough to be studied further.
Okay. Geetam, if I could come to you, I mean, do you see? How do you see the way forward on this, really, in terms of coming up with new designs? I mean, you've outlined some principles there, but is this an issue for the World Bank to commission some new research, or not research, sorry, some principles, design principles, or is this something in country which can be done? And does every country need to go away and do its own design standards?
I mean, I don't think World Bank, I should depend on World Bank.
Okay, they've got no money anyway, we've heard, so they've got no money. So Bloomberg
I think as a researchers, it's important for our community to understand that there are these important scientific principles. We have a rich history, we have learned a lot, but unless we do more experiments and new knowledge generation in our own context, we are not going to find all the answers.
So it's more about local experimentation and monitoring.
Yes,
than
design. And local experimentation, because clearly the context is different, because the traffic mix is different. And it's not just a question of low income and high income, because today India is 30% urbanized. And even with, some people say it's a high urbanization, it is not actually. And by 2030, we will have only 40% of our population living in urban areas. So we'll continue to have these kind of highways and small towns and villages along the highways. So I think that is why it is important. And these are the countries where, so it's Africa, it's Southeast Asia, it's South Asia, where this problem has taken this huge, the kind of problem that we are facing. And that's why it's very important to do a lot of local experimentation and understand what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes we may have counterintuitive impacts. So today, if you say improve the highway, I don't know what percentage will reduce or increase.
May I interfere? Geetam has
intervene, not interfere.
Seen it in my article, namely that I'm referring to two cases in Africa, one in Kenya and one in Ghana. And the one in Kenya is extremely interesting because I have introduced a fantastic new motorway. It's the first motorway in the country. And then they had been forced, for some reason, to put in bumps now and then. So on this motorway with a speed standard of 100, 110, suddenly all vehicles drive in 5 kilometers per hour. Just imagine it in the middle of nowhere. So I say it because it should be a very interesting case to study, and there are researchers in Nairobi that are studying this.
I visited Kenya myself 2 years ago, and we were delayed because a coach had the previous day run into a herd of cattle as they were crossing through the village, and the Maasai tribesmen had brought the road to a halt. Actually, it was an important road, and they brought the road to a halt until they were compensated. So just to show the power of local people, inappropriate.
I just want to share one very interesting thing that we have observed in many Indian towns and villages. Because what has happened that, even though a lot of people say that many poor people don't care about their life, that is not true, because when you pass through these national highways, our national highway standard says you cannot have any speed reducing measures on national highways and state highways. But when you drive through on these national highways, and as they are passing through towns and villages, local people end up making their own speed humps. Now they cannot follow a standard because the national standard doesn't exist, because the professionals refuse to recognize this as a problem and therefore provide a solution for it. Because according to them, this is illegal, it should not happen. So now you have thousands of speed humps and rumble strips on these high-speed roads, and which probably have solved they must have reduced some fatalities. And in one of the projects that we were doing for the ministry, we went and we came up with this very nice scientific method of doing it. Slowly you inform the road users, introduce rumble strips, and then finally the speed hump. So bring down the speed systematically. And when they tried to implement it, then the road engineers called us and they said, villagers are not letting us do, you discuss with them. So we held meetings with them. And first thing we said, look, we are not from the government, we are only academic institutes. We completely understand your problem. And therefore, we are not removing the speed hump. We are just telling you a different design and how systematically it should be done. After listening to that whole story, that village, the person who was heading the village, he told me, you people are from some famous institute, you can do your experiment anywhere in the country. Why do you want to do it here? Because since the time we have made the speed humps, it is working. We have not had any deaths on this road since then. So there is they don't trust the government to do the right things. So it is a lot of struggle actually to do these kind of experiments also and understand what is working.
So we've had speed, we've had highway design or modification, and then two-wheelers, particularly power two-wheelers, pedestrians, cyclists, I think. You conclude your paper by saying, that there's very little research in this area, and I'm conscious that there's lots of research into, say, young drivers or vehicle design, car-based research, and driver-based research. Why do you think motorcyclists, who are clearly a highly vulnerable group, form a huge percentage of fatalities, are so under-researched and under-evaluated?
Could be, let's say, inequality issue. Could be thing that in developed or high-income countries has two-wheelers as some kind of luxury to go around, or no as the problem that we have in the middle low-income countries. And since is in our country that going on due to the reasons that I was presenting, is a fact. It's a fact, as we saw it this morning with the data from Dinesh, that 75 around percent are of the deaths are due to the pedestrian, two-wheelers, mostly in our countries. And let's say the ones that have been showing, the little research that has been showing shows actually that, for example, helmets, daylight lights are effective, and some
all day running lights.
running lights, yes, and also the reflective vest. But I think that might be the answer to your question. I really, you don't know how to push more around the design. And then sometimes when you go around the world and you see differences even in the government, that, for example, there are some laws over some high-speed vehicles, two-wheeler, motorized two-wheel vehicles, but on the, let's say, low motors or power, there are not much enforcement or, let's say, control. And when you see it on the reality, the two of them have the same risk to die. So why they put this on the capacity of the motor? We have to just go on that. And actually, behavior is very controversial as well. If we can do some research about brakes and ABC for this kind of vehicles or something like that, it could help.
It does seem to me that the focus is still very much on the motorcyclist, and making the motorcyclist responsible for his or her own safety, rather than the other road users in many cases. And I also suspect that there is an assumption amongst a lot of decision makers, funders, researchers, and so forth, that motorcycles, powered two-wheelers, scooters, they're for youngsters, and they'll grow up and have a car sooner or later, and development, and those are the aspirations. So that's what it's only a temporary transition, and let's just not, rather like cyclists, cyclists, as countries get richer, they stop cycling and so on. Anyway, those are my sort of suspicions about why there's not enough research in this area. But I think I want to open it up to the floor. So if you would introduce yourself, to say, I know we've perhaps heard this already, but who you are, where you're from, and your question, please. And if you haven't asked a question before, I'll give you priority. But come on, there must be lots of hands to come. Right, one gentleman here, one starter here.
Yeah, just in relation to telematics, and just to add to the question that was answered, we're currently running a randomised trial on the effects of insurance premiums via telematics. And I know telematics as a form of insurance is quite popular in the UK. There hasn't been a randomised trial undertaken on the benefits of it. Where it's a pragmatic trial, so it's actually an insurance company that's actually been participating in the trial. It has we undertook the first stage of it, which was running a randomised trial in a simulator environment to see what may come out of it in that regard. And the findings were very positive in terms of changing young drivers' behaviour around how to, speed particularly. And the incentive was what is effective is it's a punitive incentive. So basically, you may take out an insurance premium. It may cost $500. Say if you actually drive in an aberrant way, or in terms of exceeding posted speed limits on X occasions, and set by the telematics provider, you would lose, say, the $500. You'll lose $25 each quarter or 10 days or whatever, and you'd be told that. And it appears that punitive way of dealing with insurance rather than rewarding has major implications in terms of their driving behaviours, in terms of particularly speed. So we're just seeing if that now holds up in a pragmatic trial. So it should be completed by the end of this year.
Individual insurance companies are less keen on the punitive approach because of course
totally, yeah,
that makes
totally.
their
I mean,
them
this
seem,
is,
but sure,
this is a behavioural economics
Yeah,
piece, and I think
yeah.
telematics particularly has been used not so much as an intervention as such, but as a way of monitoring where drivers are and what they're doing.
Yeah.
Whereas in this instance, it can actually be changed, can be used.
There is a
consent.
trial now underway in the UK.
Yeah, there's a chap from the University of West England
It's
who's still
TRL
tapped.
that's leading.
Oh, okay, all right. There's another one as well.
I saw a hand go up over there. Is that Carvey?
So I just want to add an anecdote to telematics. So it's an anecdote, I don't have systematic evidence, and it's an anecdote from me having a telematics device in my car that my insurance company would have offered me a 30% discount if I was able to maintain zero accelerations and braking events. And oh my god, it's so difficult to do. And I tried really, really hard. So what
Just
I'm
a bad
getting at
driver.
is the highway infrastructure around my house pretty much makes it so that it's very difficult to not have those harsh acceleration braking events. I gave up driving for that period where they have the monitoring device, so I could get much of the discount. But I'm sort of bouncing this question to Geetam in the sense of how much does the system and specifically the highway infrastructure affect driving behavior?
Yeah. Should I answer that?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah, I
yes.
think totally. I mean, you have to read all the earlier papers by the two great researchers. I've been reading what Ezra has been writing in Rune. And there is so much evidence on that how driving behavior is dictated by the kind of infrastructure we design. And also, I think sometimes even Farida talked about it, that how drivers get message from the road that we design. That's how traffic psychologists have explained it. Roads talk to the drivers. So the roads are telling us to drive fast or slow, and that has much more influence than what we say we put a speed limit sign. That has hardly any impact, and as compared to whether we design straight road, curved roads, narrow roads, wide roads. All these seem to have much more influence on our driving behavior. So I think that is the principle I'm trying to understand and take some clues from there. Can we use this, and can we start making a strong argument that in fact what we call bad driving behavior or good driving behavior, maybe not 100%, but 70-80% can be explained by the kind of roads that we are designing. Compliance with speed limits. It has to do with what we design and what we are asking people to do.
Christian?
May I just add that it's interesting to hear all these stories about all fantastic efforts to make people to drive a little bit slower. It's not a matter of driving at the speed limit or below. It's just to adjust the system so that people behaves a little bit more decent, I think. And why avoiding the basic question all the time? Why not making it impossible to drive faster than the speed limit? Yeah. It's so completely different. It produces a so completely different scope, simply. People have to start. Now they can't punish other pedestrians that are slow, etc., etc. It changes the whole system very dramatically, I would say. And it's not dramatic in itself. Yeah. Technically, it's very easy.
But it's very political, and it takes us into.
Yeah, but politicians,
well, not just politicians.
they are only a minority.
Policy.
Yeah. But that's why I gave you that example. So what do people want?
Well, exactly.
In Indian villages, they want those speed humps. But the minority, the people who are deciding the standards,
they don't like it.
So they are calling it illegal because it doesn't exist in the West.
one
When
of
you're
PACTS,
driving
one
highways,
of
you
PACTS'
should not
early
have it.
campaigns was, you know, in the early 80s, you got a provisional license and you could go into a motorcycle dealer and get on a 500cc motorcycle. We got 1,000 little black coffins and lay them outside Mrs. Thatcher's number 10. You could walk in there. It's 1,000 little coffins. And that made me really popular with the Motorcycle Action Group. On the front page, I've still got it framed. It says, Barry Shearman, man or monster. But we did get graduated
What's the answer,
system.
Barry?
We introduced
Yeah.
a graduated
Yeah.
system of learning on a small cycle, going on a larger, and so on. Have you got that in India and have you got that in Colombia? Is it no graduated?
But they're smaller, they're lower speed bikes anyway, aren't they? Less powerful machines anyway, in many cases.
But what about the training program?
That's the problem.
You don't have a training program before you get a license.
So training doesn't work.
The thing is, in Colombia, the thing that we are able to do, at least with the motorcyclist dealers, are just to, when somebody buy a motorcycle,
Yeah.
they get for free the helmet. That is one thing that we did go through.
Yeah.
But the people who are, you know, they just go and they are very low cost, that they just get the license, you know, they are legal, but they don't do training or they don't ask for any. And also, the training thing has so controversial things as well. But they go have a, let's say, for less than $50, you get a motorcycle and you go on the road.
Yeah.
So
Zero training, just this.
no, I mean they can drive, but there is no
Okay.
a consensus, and nothing. But you know that it also this training is very controversial too, because as Geetam says, if you have no, if you are no, your infrastructure doesn't work. If everything doesn't work, even you have a big PhD in training, you cannot, or you don't behave very well in an environment that there is no telling you what is going on, or what you should do, or what you can be protected.
Okay, I'm going to stop that conversation there because I'm conscious we're sort of approaching lunch. Brian, you've been waiting to come in for your question.
There's no evidence that motorcycle rider training makes any difference whatsoever. But I want to go back to the telematics and insurance, and it's a word of caution about these studies unless they're truly randomized, because for years in the US, insurers gave discounts for students who did driver education, and they could show that that was actuarially justified. But what is happening with driver training is that the people who voluntarily choose to take a course are already, quote, safer drivers than those who don't. And if you're letting people voluntarily decide, I want to be in a telematics program to get an insurance discount, they're probably different than the drivers who don't choose to do that. So
That's right.
you've got to be very careful about looking for causality in that kind of.
No, that's absolutely recognised. Okay, so I've got more and more hands going up, and we're getting closer to lunch now. This is obviously. All right, it's a quick one.
Well,
Needs
I
to be
want to
quick.
say
Everyone's
that
waiting for lunch.
this whole business about driving nicely is rubbish. If you were a motorcycle driver at 25 years old, you don't get a motorcycle to be nice. I got a motorcycle because I wanted to be dangerous. Anyone tells me to drive carefully was an idiot. Now, it's great fun being dangerous on a motorcycle. Going down the mountainside at high speeds, taking fast corners. So, we have to say that this is something normal, driving dangerously. And I'm still alive. So it was not bad.
And that applies not only to motorcyclists. A lot of car drivers also like to go
Drunk
fast. I mean,
car
this is the whole
drivers
issue about
also,
speed.
the risk is so low. That's why
Well,
they keep driving.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
point
okay.
is that we are not focusing on what we need to do. That is, in all our countries, there are thousands of experiments going on. Like what Geetam mentioned, so many there are about 500,000 speed humps made in India by villagers. There are places where they have narrowed the road. They made a different texture. Go to Vietnam, they have separate lanes for motorcycles. We keep talking about no money. All the money has been spent on experiments, but none of us want to go and study it. No one wants to give money to study it. If you take 500,000 or maybe 1 million speed humps made by villages in India with no investment by the World Bank or by the Indian government, it's free. They are saving probably 30,000 lives. Uneducated Indian villagers are probably saving 30,000 lives a year. We are not willing to study it. How they work, where have they been put? Vietnam has motorcycle only lanes in their cities and highways. Why has no one studied the effect? I don't know whether the work won't work, but money is being spent in all poor countries on safety. We are very concerned. That's why if you have an accident, poor people burn your vehicle.
I think that's a great point. I think we've taken that one. I want to ask first behind you.
I've just a short comment also with regard to the telematics and insurance program. So when I speak to our people from the PTI, they tell me that brakes degenerate if you don't use it, and that you will have a significantly better performance of your brakes in case you really need them if you don't use it before in the proper way, because you have this degeneration of brakes. So this is from a technical perspective. So if you drive only very softly always, then you get this degeneration of your brakes, and so it does not only have a positive effect. I have a different comment for the.
I've never heard that before. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
An additional comment on the speed. I think I'm not saying that because I'm from Germany and we were blamed for the no speed limit in German motorways.
We get blamed behind.
You're all mad.
No, I don't say that. But I feel sometimes that the focus is too much on this high speed area. But we've heard before that the problem is with the vulnerable road users. And my personal experience is that people don't feel that they are driving 50 instead of 30 in a modern car because the environment is so smooth and you don't hear something. Yeah. This is where we should put more focus on, and this is where it really makes a difference if you hit a pedestrian with 50 or if you hit a pedestrian with 30.
Yeah.
30.
Well, yeah. So are we self-explaining roads and self-explaining cars that encourage you to stick to the limit, right? Yeah, rather than.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. So yes, sorry, you had your hand up before.
David Schooner. I want to make two comments. One about speed. Our experience is that the problem is with the stakeholders. The public perception of speed that you mentioned here before is very different from the common wisdom that we have here. The public perception is also shaped to a large extent by the media writers. And the safety, the people who write about safety, I don't know how many people are aware, are also the automotive fanatics. They like speed. It's the same people who write the same columns. And they have ample evidence, mostly from police data, to show that speed does not matter. Okay? They use correlational data, they use force experimentation, but they write articles. And that's what the public reads. They do not read accident analysis and prevention. The government then does not have political will. In just about any country that I know. There is no political will.
No country.
Having said that, there's a lot of cities now which are introducing 30 kilometres per hour limits quite widely.
Yes.
Quite widely.
In urban areas.
Yes.
Where the pedestrian voices are being heard
and
because of their children and the cyclists.
Yeah.
The Dutch approach, I think, is very commendable. The sustainable safety, where the separation of traffic by functionality. Yeah. It's not being practiced everywhere. It is implemented to a great extent, as far as I know, in the Netherlands. I think it's very effective.
Okay, fantastic. Lady at the back.
Okay, hi. I'm Asrina from developing countries, middle-income country from Malaysia. We also face the same problem like India, which high number of fatalities involving motorcyclists, which now I'm doing research in motorcycle safety. But my country now try to promote public transport instead of invest more on the motorcyclists because they can't do anything more on the motorcyclists because they always speeding on the road. Even we have a dedicated motorcycle lane, but still the number of accidents involving motorcyclists is very, very high. So now what our government do is improve our public transport system. They now construct the MRT, but in other words, they increase our country debt. So that is the problem between researcher and also the policymaker.
The systems approach.
So they're
Thinking much more broadly. Yeah.
But the problem now with my research is to get a proper data, adequate data, because we don't get good cooperation from the police, from the hospital, from the local authority. And based on my first research, the underreporting rate in Malaysia involving the vulnerable road user is very worse, 95% underreporting when I compare police and hospital record. So we don't get very good data to provide good safety countermeasure. That is maybe the main problem, the data.
Thank you. Really interesting. I'm going to call it a halt there because lunch is due. I think that's been a fantastic session, and thank you. I think we thank our speakers again.